Welcome back to the Barron Report. This is the special series on the coronavirus impact on the restaurant and hospitality industry. I'm your host, Paul Barron, and of course today we are going to be breaking down a ton of data, but also have a chance to talk to an operator coming to us from Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Basile from Wildflower, the Wildflower Bread Company. So we're going to get a chance to talk to him about what's happening in Arizona and also kind of break down what we are still continuing to find. If you hadn't had a chance, our second episode of the special series was really kind of the announcement of our Coronavirus International Restaurant Action Committee. And the way that works, if you just go to the URL that's right there on screen right now, which is foodibletv.com/coronavirus-impact for our audio listeners. Just visit that URL, or you can also follow me over on Twitter at Paul Barron. I'm tweeting that URL out quite a bit. The Impact Center is really designed to, the committee is really designed to kind of coalesce both operators, experts, industry suppliers, and so on to kind of come together with potential tips, tactics, and things that we can do to help the operators stay in play. And really there was kind of the 5 points that we were looking at. One is respond to the email if you've got one, or social, and just be able to join the action committee. Just join right there on the website. Just fill out a few things. We do want you to take part in podcasts just like this right here to share your strategies that may be able to assist others. And of course, Lewis is going to be doing that here shortly. And then also share local business impacts with full transparency on how business, employee, and guest climate is within your operations. That is very important for the restaurant industry so that we do have the ability to act or be able to implement strategies that can potentially help other operators, and that's a big part of this. And then number 4 is please forward this over to colleagues or partners that could assist in this effort. So if you know someone within your organization or you know someone within your group of colleagues, make sure and send it out. We'll be publishing findings each week on a special insight center that is up on the website right now. So you just go to foodibletv.com. On the news tab, it's the second drop down right there that goes right to the tab for the coronavirus update. And that's where all of this content, podcasts, videos, et cetera, will be going to. Really, the other elements that we wanted to focus on with the action committee was to really focus on 3 major elements to kind of the mission of what the action committee was going to be doing. Number 1 is we've launched the action committee obviously to assist in best practices and information distribution across our network. So this will be hitting YouTube, Spotify, Apple News, all the places that you potentially get, obviously on foodibletv.com, but all the places you potentially get your news from us and others. This is where all of our information and research will be published. Secondly, we're taking heavy measures to really amp up our data gathering. And this is something that we've done to really kind of take a focus in on implementing a strategy that looks at data from a lot of cities here within the U.S. that are primarily mapping against particular coronavirus topics and or mentions, conversations, both from a consumer and the operator standpoint, to be able to evaluate what kind of impact this is having on the restaurant industry. So we'll have some early indicators for you, and I'm going to be showing you some data here in a minute that will kind of talk to you a little bit about some of the cities that are starting to see some movement already. And then we've also launched what you're looking at right now or listening to right now, which is a special series here on the Barron Report, which will be available on all of our standard distribution right within it. So if you're already subscribed to this podcast, you're going to be getting these updates as quickly as we can get them out. We do have a heavy lineup of operators, state associations, experts, all coming on the show to be able to share as much information as they can to assist you with your daily and your basically your restaurant operations as you go forward. So let's get into some of the basic travel or some of the basic data right now. Obviously, Foodable Labs, right now we are estimating an impact on the restaurant and hospitality industry estimated at about 3.3 billion by May 1st. And this is really coming from what we're seeing from some of the hot spots such as Seattle, but also from some of the trends that have started to develop in places like New York, even Dallas, Texas, that are starting to show signs of a slowing in a restaurant operation. So I want to share a little bit about that. But Obviously, we do know the president came on last night, essentially kind of shut down travel. Well, did shut down travel, I think, to and from Europe, and of course has started to implement a ton of procedures that are going to kind of shift the way we deal with business. One thing that I think most operators are doing is if you're not already doing, is making sure that you're staying very close in contact with your representatives and obviously your state restaurant associations. Now is the time to try to get some activity moving in those areas. This is some other things that have been published, and this is one thing that I've started to kind of jump on the bandwagon. We have here at Foodable have suspended all travel for our employees, so we are not moving out in terms of air travel and going into those places. Obviously, we're still doing things and projects by cars and with remote operations as best we can. But some things that is very interesting. This was published on Vox this morning, and essentially it's kind of talking about the peak outbreak period against the ability for the healthcare system to be able to sustain. And what I think, when you look at the restaurant and hospitality industry, we have a big part and role in this happening correctly. And the first thing is going to be event and conference cancellation and postponement. We've already seen, I would say, about 60 to 70% of the events that have been going on in the last 30 days have either highly modified or have canceled or postponed their event. And I think we're going to continue to see that, especially now with what we're seeing in terms of the outbreak. But also with how the government starts to respond. Secondly, I think it is doing exactly what we've done, which is reducing air travel dramatically. And that is unfortunately a big hit to the airlines and the economy, because there's a ton of people that are employed in that. So I think we will still see air travel continuing on. Movement will still continue to happen unless we do get into a quarantine state, much like what China and Italy have kind of faced. Hopefully that is not going to be something that happens. And then reducing contact in areas of 100 or more people. I think this is some of those things that we're going to start seeing implemented that will affect the restaurant industry. And I do believe that we are going to have to start to shift some of our tactics on how we're doing food, whether it's takeaway and or delivery, to be able to kind of weather this storm. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, of course, lastly is potential closings, school closings. If that does happen, we could see a huge implication on the restaurant industry, again, because most families are dual working families. So it becomes a very big load on a family to be able to keep children home. And if that does happen, it will shift the dynamic of how the restaurant community is going to be faced with actions in terms of eating out at lunch, especially the lunch hours are probably the ones I would say would see the most hit in terms of this. With all of these things happening, the idea, I think, here with what many of the researchers and medical professionals are looking at is mainly just to kind of keep our medical systems in a position to where they can respond, as opposed to them getting overwhelmed with mass outbreaks and mass contagion, because if that does obviously happen, then all bets are off for essentially any business that's out there today, and that's what we want to stay away from. So very serious situation as we continue to see Seattle. This is additional data that we looked at in our past episode of looking at Seattle restaurant visits and Seattle restaurant closures. These are things we're tracking on Foodable Labs. We've been able to extrapolate the data on out through 3/31, and it is now March 12th. So the last data set we pulled was on March 10th. We were at 151 closures and down about 51% in sales from the previous 2 weeks. So this, and when I say transactions, more so, which are restaurant visits, people going out into the restaurants. We will have coverage in Seattle. We have a camera team in Seattle right now that will be filming this weekend and trying to pull in what is happening on the streets in Seattle and in the restaurants, and how is the impact really hitting, and does it match up with the data that we're pulling in. So where we do see this in terms of closures and visits is we look at it probably close to 70% reduction in revenue by the end of March. and probably in the tune of about 390 plus closures for the city and greater area of Seattle. This is a big one. Obviously, Seattle is the epicenter of the coronavirus here in the U.S., and the restaurants are definitely seeing the impact. This is the first time that we've shown this map, and essentially what we've done is we've looked at all of the major cities that are starting to show signs and implications of this. So obviously Seattle, the data just shows there 391 closings. This is by what our forecast is by the end of March, a couple weeks away, a little less than 2 weeks away. Seattle, as I just said, about 391 closings and potentially a down 60%. Los Angeles, we are estimating around 289 closings and down about 30%, 32%. Then we jump to Dallas, around 309 closings and an estimated down 29% by the end of March. Obviously, there are a lot of factors in play that could really shift that if we see any kind of mass quarantine or if we see an uptick in terms of cases once the testing starts to really hit and the population starts to see that. Chicago MSA, which means Metropolitan Statistical Area, 212 closings, visits down by 31%. Obviously in Chicago, they have stopped the St. Paddy's Day Parade, which is a huge event in the city of Chicago, in many cities, but in Chicago, it's a special event, especially around the river area, because you've got so many restaurants that are centered in the downtown area that really maximize sales based on that. We are taking that into consideration. St. Paddy's Day is one of the big days of the year for restaurant operators, especially in the city of Chicago. Secondly is New York, or continuing on is New York. New York, of course, does have a hot spot. Their mayor has really kind of taken a very aggressive stance toward quarantining certain areas and have kind of done a lockdown in one of the areas of New York to help contain that spread there. And we are estimating right now around 280 closings and around 39% drop in sales by the end of March. That's what we're seeing in terms of consumer sentiment and frequency in where consumers are actually talking about eating out in restaurants. This is a big concern for the industry. Obviously, we're based here in Miami, so we are watching this even though Miami is not a hot spot yet. About 69 closings is what we're seeing. That's not really far off our normal every month pace. Is we do see a lot of turn here in the Miami and Fort Lauderdale area. The thing that concerns me a little bit is the visit numbers, which is down about 21% currently. Again, what we normally see on a month over month is 2, 3, 5% in some of these markets, either down or up. So we will have more data on this, and the next time you see this map, the likelihood is you're going to see more cities involved here and obviously some new points of data that we'll be looking at. And most likely we're going to try to pull additional data in about 2 weeks at the end of March, kind of track against what we had already reported as of today. And hopefully it doesn't get any worse than this, and that's what we're really kind of praying for on our end in terms of the restaurant industry. This is another exponential economic impact that I'm looking at right now on the estimated potential impact if it's based on, and this is what we did with Foodable Labs. We built an algorithm essentially that we've mapped against case number here in the U.S. And of course, we're looking at the contagion rates that have essentially been enveloped around the world, whether you look at China, whether or not you can believe the numbers that had come out of China in the early going, but places like Italy, South Korea, some of those countries who are very transparent in their reporting and looking at their case uptick. And obviously, as we start to really implement testing, this is where the exponential could really hit. And what I've done here is I've broken this down by week, starting out at week on March 9th, which was essentially the first week that we really started tracking data against these cases. At that time, we had a 540 case count. We look at about 1546 was just reported yesterday on, just actually early this week. We were at 1,500 cases, or over 1,000 cases. By 16th, we will be at 1,500 cases. And this starts to exponentially climb. And what I've done is the red line is estimated restaurant closures. that potentially could be impacted based on case uptick. So the amount of cases that start to hit here in the U.S. obviously will affect movement. And if movement is affected at any great length, that will affect the restaurant industry, especially when you look at the restaurant industry at really being about 70 to 80% dine-in or restaurants that are serving guests. With even though third party and to-go and online ordering has been on a huge climb, it is not necessarily a major part of most of the restaurant operations. So these are some numbers that could be very concerning as we look out all the way through April 20th. And at the pace we're at right now, unless we see a major limitation of movement or quarantining, we could be seeing very similar uptick to things that had happened in Italy. And even in that case, when you look at our population size, over 320 million, an 85,000 feels pretty low, but its uptake, when you look at exponential growth, that starts to double or plus of that every 6 days. And that's the concern that I think experts and medical officials are really tracking. What we're trying to do is align that with where does this affect the restaurant industry as this starts to tick up if we continue to see this going into the late spring and potentially even early summer. So with all that, I know it's not a lot of great news. We are estimating, and let me jump back to that slide here, because we are estimating right now, based on this slide right here, the amount of closures and the reduction of revenue on average check and average number of visits on a day in, day out basis. This, by May 1st, we could see an estimated $3.3 billion in lost revenue for the restaurant industry, which would be pretty significant. Not a major thing to overcome, because it could be done. The concern would be if things get worse after late April. That's really kind of the next 30 days is a critical time, both in the economic front, because you essentially have kind of three options. One, you can save your economy, you can save your healthcare system, or you've got to essentially look at draconian measures which have been taken in places like Italy and China, which really starts to limit movement and quarantining large masses of populations. So we are in the front spear of this right now. We're talking to restaurant operators. We are talking to experts. We're getting as much information as we can. We've really ramped up the number of episodes that we're doing here on the Barron Report to be able to get you information as fast as possible. And again, just go right here to the screenshot on the slide right now. This is our website. Just go right to the news tab, go to foodabletv.com, hit that second one right there. That's where all of this content will be living. So you'll be able to just go right into the coronavirus impact. These episodes, podcasts, research, data points. We'll probably even be putting up some of these slides there, so you guys can at least have more and more factual data on the reports that we're working on right now. Next up with me is Louis Basile, the CEO of Wildflower. Now, Wildflower is a fast casual concept based out of Phoenix, Arizona. We're going to have Louis on next, and he's going to give us some input on how he's dealing with it in his organization. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back here to the Barron Report. As you guys know, we are covering the coronavirus impact on the restaurant and hospitality industry. And the way we're doing that is we are bringing on some of the best minds and expert and operators in the industry to basically share what they are doing to both prepare and also act in their own organizations. I've got with me the CEO of Wildflower. Great to have you, Louis.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
So Louis, let's just break into some of the questions I wanted to chat with you for our audience. The first one is, how are you communicating with your guests? What's kind of the process that Wildflower is using right now?
So, Paul, as soon as this became really evident that there was going to be an incredible amount of anxiety from, quite frankly, not only our guests, but also our employees that we call our breadheads,
right.
We jumped into action. So we immediately We have a bread sampling station that's self-service, so we immediately stopped putting out those bread samples, and that's where we've actually chosen to communicate with the guest. So there's a small, tasteful sign up. That's a main hub in our restaurants. Some people might even make a meal out of our bread samples. So most people are familiar with going there, and really
Right.
it just simply says there that one, we care about our breadheads and our guests. We've increased and enhanced our sanitation and safety procedures. And you're going to see ongoing changes in our operation so that we can ensure that the guest is as safe as possible, along with our breadheads. And that we implemented at the beginning of this week. And it's been pretty successful. Our guests seem to appreciate the communication, and we'll get into it later, but what we're doing. But I
Yeah.
think that it's really the actions that, quite frankly, speak louder than the words.
For sure. Louis, how many units are you up to now in the greater Phoenix area?
So we're in the state of Arizona. We run 16 restaurants, basically 13 in the greater Phoenix area, and then 3 up north heading towards Flagstaff, Arizona.
Okay. All right. So obviously you've got a good handle of kind of the current state of economic condition there in the state of Arizona. What are you seeing in terms of numbers that you can share with the audience here?
Yeah, I mean, Paul, you and I have been doing this a long time, so I'm a really transparent guy. So, folks out there, we were running we're a 24-year-old brand. So, on our same store sales, we had been running up 7% basically for the first 8 weeks of the year. And
Okay.
for the week ending Monday, which I believe was March 9th, we
Yep.
were 0.6% up. So we've seen a effectively 6.5 points of same store sale erosion just in the last week.
The state of Arizona, obviously one of the prolific operators in terms of restaurant operations, and obviously this time of year is a big time of year for you guys. Louis, when you look at this, forecasting it, obviously kind of down the road, how are you prepared for this in terms of both operationally and then also potentially with sales erosion? Any tactics that you're putting in place now to kind of deal with that?
Right. So I think that it goes without saying that this is unprecedented. I've been in the business now for 41 years, and I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. So
Right.
from my perspective, communication's key. So we immediately started a daily COVID-19 phone call. And that has our key senior managers and operations people on it. And we do that 7 days a week. We scan basically all of the news feeds. We check the Arizona Department of Health Services website. We're looking what's coming out of the Arizona Restaurant Association, National Restaurant Association, any inputs that we can get, and then we basically evaluate where we're at in terms of our current procedures. We immediately put into place an enhanced health and safety checklist that requires we're now hourly washing our hands. So every breadhead that's working every hour. We have increased sanitation of all of the touch surfaces. We're a fast casual brand, so we're wiping down all of the registers. We do have a self-service beverage station. We're wiping that down. We're wiping all of our bathrooms, including the handles and the vanities. Most of our stores have touchless soap and sinks. That seems to have been very positive, both from our breadheads perspective that have embraced it, and from our guest perspective that appreciate the fact that we're actually visibly doing things that matter.
Right.
We've removed point of sale material like a table tent that people can touch. That's really what we're doing now. We are reaching out to our suppliers. So, for example, our chemical supplier, we're asking them to ensure on their weekly chemical supply delivery that they're actually checking all of our equipment to ensure that it's operating properly. That was happening every other week previous to that. We've reached out to all of our um, repair network vendors as well as our suppliers. And of course, we've instituted a very strict that we had already. If you're sick, you can't work. We're planning on Saturday to send out a letter to all of our breadheads explaining how we will compensate them if they do happen to come down with the COVID-19 and have to miss a quarantine period of work. We
Yeah.
do plan to compensate our employees.
Okay. Well, I know that you guys are, of course, are one of the big leaders on doing the right thing for the industry. So that's great. And I love these tips. This is kind of one of the things that we're trying to do with this series is get as many operators and experts to provide these kinds of tips that other operators can initiate immediately. When you look at kind of the morale aspect, maintaining morale of your employees, that's a big factor, especially in a time like this. Lewis, what are you doing to kind of keep the breadheads all pumped up and ready for Wildflower each day?
Paul, it's interesting. Darren Edwards, who's our operations manager, that would be like a director of operations role for terminology sake. He said on the call yesterday that actually the breadheads are incredibly
Very
positive,
positive. Yeah.
actually embracing the fact that they have an opportunity, one, that we care and that we're doing something, that
Yeah.
we've communicated it, and that they actually have an opportunity to show their guests. Right, we've been doing this a long time. We have a lot of regular guests that come in on a daily basis, and I think for now the attitude is actually incredibly upbeat and positive.
That's great.
And like anything, I think if this really wears on for a long time, I think it's going to be a challenge because, when there's something new and you rally around something, even if it's a crisis like this, I generally think that people rise to the occasion. It's that daily diligence. 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, whatever that time frame, that's when I think it really is going to be potentially challenging to continue to keep up this level of as you call it, either morale or support on these programs because they're vital to ensure, quite frankly, the health of both the breadheads and the guests.
Lewis, I've had a chance, we launched our coronavirus, essentially the Restaurant Action Committee. Basically, now we've got a little over 250 members that are starting to pour in, providing information. We're going to be publishing best practices, tips, things of that nature. One thing that seems to be coming up a lot with a lot of the operators that we're talking to is a shifting of their operations staff moving into more to-go, takeout food, and obviously delivery and catering. How are you guys, do you see this as a potential transition for more out-of-restaurant transactions for you guys?
Are you asking, let me clarify, are you asking that in the short term and the long term, or?
I think more so like in 30 days. Where would we be if we continue down the path that, obviously countries like Italy and China had went down. In the next 30 days, obviously we're going to be in a much worse situation. Obviously that will affect the restaurant industry. What kind of things are you guys prepared for in terms of still being able to keep operations rolling, but mostly with takeaway food?
Yeah, so I think that's probably very regionally specific. In Arizona, quite frankly, at least as of this morning at 9 o'clock, according to the Arizona Department of Health Services, we have 2 confirmed cases with 7 presumptive yeses. So that's a pretty low number. So I think here right now, the consumer, I can't obviously speak for everyone, but based on what we're seeing in our restaurants, the consumers are cautious, yet they're still coming out.
Right.
We have not seen a material increase in, quite frankly, to go or delivery business. Now, on the catering side, Paul, you had asked me earlier, what are we doing prepared for the sales piece? We've seen actually a material decrease in catering, which you can understand. We've had some events that are closed
Not as
here.
many
This
groups.
is
Yeah.
busiest time in Arizona. And with most, let's call it white collar companies moving to either remote or letting folks work from home, there are really not the need for those business catering meetings anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the business that we've already seen a dramatic decrease in our business.
Contingency plans if this thing goes on until summer, if we see continued issues here in the U.S. until June or July. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I would suggest that every restaurateur that listens reaches out to their state association. They put together some sort of task force with their current state association or board members. And I believe that we need to start reaching out to our local city and state representatives. Different states, again, are going to be in different positions. However, I want to remind everyone and anyone that listens, the restaurant industry is the second largest private sector employer in the country.
Yep.
And without us keeping the economic, economy going by employing people, that's going to be tough. None of us want to be cutting people's hours and laying people off. So at some level, I surely don't want to be reckless in my suggestion, but we do need people to continue to either dine out or order food from restaurants in order for us to not see an unintended consequence of actually employing less people.
You're right. It is second largest private employer. The ripple effects too on just the economy from the amount of money that flows into the economy from the workers that are in hospitality and the restaurant industry can be pretty devastating as we continue to track both restaurant visits and closures here with Foodable Labs. So I definitely agree with you. Louis, all right, thoughts on as we look at this out in the future, we get past this, do you feel that this could start to change restaurants' mindset on how to operate as a whole? Do you feel like we could see more focus on online delivery, even though we were kind of already heading down that track? We've seen so much growth in that direction. Could this be a catalyst that really starts to make that needle move that direction?
Paul, I think that like everything, it's really going to be a consumer-driven answer to that question.
Yeah.
The consumer is going to decide whether this is potentially, a game changer, and do they want to enjoy dining out in a very different way than we have traditionally. I'd like to believe that dining out is an incredible social event that people look forward to. It has always been a respite for consumers and guests from potentially the daily grind, or a way to celebrate some sort of successes or family birthdays. And the core of being a human being is interaction and conversation. And so I wish I had a crystal ball, and I wish I could answer that question a little more directly. I do think that it's completely consumer driven. I guess my final comment on that would be that if we don't have anything like this or similar happen sort of in the near future after this is under control, then my sense is that things return somewhat to normal. There are surely going to be consumers that make choices and change their dining habits and potentially choose not to eat out anymore. However, if we have another potential crisis like we're experiencing now, within a relatively short time frame of this, I think that then could drive a real shift in the way people think about eating out.
Yeah. As you know, I'm very close to the medical community. I get a chance to listen to a lot of doctors and researchers talk about this, and I had a chance to listen to a researcher last night that was going into the SARS epidemic, which is now almost 20 years ago. But his statement was that SARS started off in the spring, had a fairly good rise, and obviously a heavy impact on the global economic condition. But the bigger issue was the second wave that hit in the fall of that same year. SARS actually had the worst case in the second wave after the summer months. So they are already warning potentially as a potential second wave of something that is as contagious as what we're dealing with now. So obviously here on the show, we're not giving any kind of medical. We're talking about the restaurant industry and the impact on it, but those are the things that we're definitely hearing around the world. All right, Louis, hey, it's been great having you on. 30 days from now, we're probably going to be calling you back. I want to see how things are in Arizona, so be ready to talk to us.
Appreciate it, Paul. All my best and love to your family, and thanks for giving me the opportunity. Hey, one last thing to all our restaurateurs out there. All I can tell you is use your best common sense, reach out to your networks, and just show your employees a lot of love and your guests, and just make sure that your employees aren't coming to work sick. Okay, wash your hands a lot and stay healthy, folks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Louis. All right, for all of you listening in, whether you're checking this out over on YouTube or if you are subscribed to our podcast on iTunes or on Spotify, make sure and drop us a note. And also, with this special series here on the Barron Report, we are talking to a ton of experts and operators like Louis. If you have someone in your state or your local community you think should be on the show to really kind of share what's going on that potentially could help the restaurant operators out there kind of weather this storm, make sure and send us a note to producer@foodabletv.com. You can also hit me up on Twitter, which is just @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on the Barron Report.